Introduction. Welcome, everyone. My name is Zach Carson. I am the curator and one of the producers of this year's Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. This is the 5th year of the symposium. This year we have over 130 speakers and over 45 sessions, which is really a testament to both the growth of the cannabis industry and the growth of the sustainability industry and the opportunity that we have in an emerging industry with such potential to address these issues from the start. The first 2 days have covered issues of social justice, waste, packaging, energy, recycling, health, wellness, and we have 2.5 more full days of this. So it's been a wonderful journey, and the Cannabis Certification Council has done an amazing job of bringing these thought leaders and industry leaders together. So thank you all for joining. Our next panel is entitled Let's Talk Trash. With Steve Peterson will be moderating, Armand Zetonia, I apologize for that one, butchered that, and Trey Riddle. This panel, little description: the cannabis industry is reported to generate 150 million tons of waste annually. So what can we do about it? How do we turn from a cost center into a tool to build brands and create new revenue? The Waste Tracker team looked at a market that gets paid by the number of barrels and takes it to a landfill. They then created a path by which recycling efforts can be documented and enables businesses to show impact on carbon footprints and sustainability and share that news with customers. So through these panelists that Steve's about to introduce, we're going to hear a lot more about some of the issues and some of the solutions for the cannabis industry as it relates to waste. And that being said, for the attendees, there is a Q&A box on the bottom and a chat box. If you have questions, I know the panelists are excited to engage with the panelists or with the attendees. So feel free to ask questions, and I will turn it over to you, Steve, and panelists.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to Talking Trash. Steve Peterson, I'm the CEO of a company called Waste Tracker, and also a partner at Trust Solutions, which is a division of Trust Capital. You might see David Hess as one of my partners on some of the other panels as well. Today we have Dr. Trey Riddle. Trey and our crew have been working together for almost a year now on, what can we do with this waste? So we'll get into that part of the conversation. And Armand Zetounian, who's the CEO of Eco Waste out of California, so one of the prominent haulers in the state. So this team has been collaborating now for a period of almost a year on how we can solve. And so what we're going to share with you today is some of the actions that we see are feasible and actions that we're actually moving on to make that difference. And as we were saying earlier, questions are welcome. We just don't want to make it a data dump. I throw in some slides together so that at least we can point to some items, but it's really to encourage dialogue and question and answers. So with that, we'll get into it. And, we all have heard and have seen, the problems with waste and, how much waste is being generated by this industry. And I think even politically, I think it's something that even when we talk to our friends over at the NCIA, it is something that we've got to do a better job articulating how we're doing a minimal impact on the environment. Because there isn't anybody else that I've seen in this industry that has not wanted to make an impact. The challenge is how do you monetize it? How do you put what's that green premium that then translates to the consumer? So with that, I'd like to Armand to talk about, and this is a discussion we had last Friday even, on the different cities and the rules and the conflicting rules. Now this is specifically a California snapshot, but Armand, feel free to share.
So, thank you, Steve. Thank you for introducing everybody. My name is Armand Zetounian, CEO of Eco Waste, like Steve mentioned. And yeah, I'd like to just jump right in and kind of go explain how, there are very conflicting different regulations or mandates, policies, call it, from the different municipalities on the state level. We have, as everybody knows, we have the BCC, who's the overarching regulating agency that monitors all cannabis activity. And they are, the kind of the oversight committee, you call it, but they don't really participate in as much as the enforcement as we would like. So a lot of the municipalities and the cities have control over also what's going on in their cities and how the waste is handled. Some cities will have different set of requirements that might not be compatible with the state's requirements. Some will be, copy pasting it one-to-one. And, what we try to do is we try and navigate those policies. We try to navigate those guidelines from the cities and the state. And we try and organize a process that is in compliance with both the state and the city, both on the state and the city level, and county for that matter. So that's kind of just a general concept of it. If anybody has any questions, I know we want to have a Q&A. So if you have any questions about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, Armand, last week we were talking about a document that Cal Recycle released relative to, haulers and licensed haulers and franchise haulers. Maybe you can explain that a little bit. And while you're doing that, I'll bring up the slide on other challenges as a whole we're facing.
Yeah, so Cal Recycle came out with some clarification on differences between the types of haulers and how best to, or how to understand which haulers to work with. From the regulation standpoint, a hauler could be an entity that is licensed through the city to perform this hauling service. Now, not every company, that doesn't mean that every company should or will be providing a service that's in compliance with the regulations. But there is a distinction between haulers from a city contracted standpoint and private haulers. So the BCC allows for private haulers to perform a service on your behalf to haul the waste and take it to an end disposal site for recycling or for any other types of disposal that might be in compliance. And some cities these cities have contracts with large haulers like Waste Management Republic that perform their collection services for residential and commercial waste. But that doesn't mean that the waste that they pick up or the service that they provide you would be in compliance with the cannabis regulations. Most of these haulers, they operate on a basis where they want to come pick up those dumpsters with their big trucks, do as many pickups as they can, and that's it. Versus a company like us or other haulers that specialize in cannabis waste, actually exit their vehicle, come to your facility, take look at the containers, scan them, manifest them, weigh them, do all the documentation that you need. You can then send to the BCC or any other agency that requires that documentation from you. You would have that from the hauler. So it's important to understand that there's a distinction where, in theory, anybody can take waste at any time, right? You can call someone from Google or you can use your franchise hauler. But are they doing it in a way that's going to keep your business in compliance? Are they going to protect your license? That's really where the value is.
On the next slide, Armand, we put together a list, and there's going to be no pop quiz, but it's basically some of the items that we see around the waste management in cannabis, and many have been addressed in this conference. But Armand, what are some of your thoughts on some of these challenges that the industry faces, and frankly, how it's to the detriment of the industry as a whole by, as we've discussed, empowering the gray or black market?
Right. So there's definitely a lot of challenges. For a new industry, it's natural for there to be a lot of challenges that we're going to have to figure out, as a community and as professionals in the industry. As for the first point, as the gray and black market, it's a huge problem for the industry in general. But cannabis waste has a big part to play in hindering the black market. So when an operator decides to dispose waste, or when an operator decides to classify something as waste, there needs to be a chain of custody where the waste is getting from the operator to disposal, to the hauler to the disposal site. And this miscategorization of waste makes it very easy for haulers to claim that they're disposing the material, but if they don't follow through, if the BCC and these local enforcement agencies don't follow through on actually pushing or suggesting more data and more detail to be involved in this categorization, it's very easy for these operators to just claim that they dispose the waste that they're supposed to and not actually do it, and then sell it under the table. So it's something that's, we really want to put a lot of attention on. It's something that could really help decrease the amount of black market sales that are happening in the cannabis market when we decide to look at a more proper categorization of the waste.
And one of the things I wanted to add is that even dealing with the recycling facilities, for example, in separating the waste is going to be a really important issue and challenge for the industry, because the landfills, the recycling facilities rather, will not accept the stalks because they're treated like palm branches. They just don't decompose properly. So they generally get separated and sent to the landfill. And when we start thinking about other waste materials like liquid waste or packaging waste or organic waste, there are the proper channels where we as haulers can bring them, but that means that you just can't have it all thrown into the same 55-gallon drum. And that's where I think some of the efforts are going to be. So Armand, any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That helps a lot. There's a lot of, the recycling facilities, some recycling facilities may not even accept it, not just because it's difficult to decompose or difficult to recycle, but because it's still cannabis, and still they might still want to follow under federal law, and they don't want to get in trouble with the federal government, so they'll try to avoid as much as they can. But this categorization of waste is extremely important because we've had instances too where we've had to step in and explain to our clients or licensees that liquid waste, there's a vast difference between liquid waste, packaging waste, types of packaging waste, the stems, the cannabis flower itself that has to be rendered. If it's not rendered with something organic, that's going into a landfill. There is no way around it. It can't be recycled. So there's definitely we need to put a little bit more attention on how we categorize it so that we can help these end disposal sites or these end recycling sites better actually recycle the product or the material.
One of the other issues that Armand and I have also seen is that even in Metric, which is our reporting system, if you're picking up a disposal and just say it's 10 boxes of cookies, things are expressed in units. The problem as a hauler is that we are measuring basically in weight, right? It's not measured in units. So we need to find a better way within even the software to reclassify, in effect, what is the approximate weight, so that if we're picking up 100 boxes of cookies that are being disposed of for being expired, for example, that would translate into 1.5 pounds, and then we would have the manifest to be able to prove that we handled 1.5 pounds appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next part, what I want to do is, I think anybody on this call would understand some of the challenges we're facing. But what we want to do is lay out some changes and that we feel we can make as a group. And we're going to touch on it in 3 areas. One is governance of it. Second is technology. And third, frankly, creating a new revenue stream for operators. So with that, I'm going to have Armand discuss the first one, which is really around governance and examples like we're in Colorado. They've been much more aggressive in looking at things like, even as we were talking about stalk waste being treated as an industrial waste product, which helps recycling efforts. But Armand, go ahead.
Yeah, so with the governments, it's similar to what I was mentioning earlier. There's a lot of conflicting. You have a lot of agencies that have conflicting ideas on how to handle the waste, and in California, CalRecycla has a mandate that a lot of any generator, whether you're cannabis or not, has to divert organic waste into a recycling facility. But these other regulations from the BCC standpoint, for example, they come in conflict with that. So something like 50-50 waste rendering, which is not something that we have to deal with here in California per se, but in other states, you have to mix material, 50% of a non-cannabis material with your cannabis waste in order for you to render it to then dispose of it. This is increasing the amount of waste that a generator has, and it also conflicts on the metric and the data side, because you have to now reconcile that this, let's say you had 50 pounds of waste to dispose, now you're disposing 100 pounds of waste because you had to render it with something. So we really need to kind of look at that as well and work with our regulators and with our municipalities to figure out a process that can be duplicated efficiently across not only just California, but across other states, that is compatible with, the organic diversion guidelines that states are coming out with nowadays. So, there's a lot of opportunities, and we're trying to participate along with Steve and Trey, and we're trying to, this team is trying to, do our best to kind of figure this solution out. But, it's something that I think is often overlooked, and there needs to be a committee, some kind of form of communication that we can then represent towards these regulators. But
this is frankly an area where this group, and as well as the NCIA, it's in its best interest to really work with, because I think it benefits all. We recently had a relationship in Maine who had to deal with regulators on cannabis waste. And the problem they ran into is the Maine Food and Drug and EPA group got involved, and all of a sudden said, no, everything goes to a landfill. They didn't want to hear about any alternatives. So we have still a lot of educating to do as an industry. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of conflicting, if I just add on to that, there's a lot of conflicting information. It makes it very difficult for licensees to really understand, like, what's the right way to do this? What's the right way to handle this? Do we listen to DPA? Do we listen to BCC? Do we listen to Cal Recicla? Do we listen to Los Angeles County? Who are we listening to? How do we do this? If I do it this way, am I going to get in trouble with them over here? And this is something that needs to be kind of, organized a lot better.
Yeah, so one of the other areas I mentioned was technology, and this for this discussion, I'm going to really put my Trust Capital hat on, because Trust is a portfolio. We see it across a number of different companies, but we also see some changes going on in the investor level of the dynamic. And so Trust Capital, just so you know, has in its portfolio companies like Waste Tracker, Grownetics, which is in basically environmental monitoring, STEMCore. And basically all working to make sustainability the future of cannabis and hemp companies, and frankly, investing. So one of the things we're seeing is, how can we adopt new ESG goals for the industry, such as we were introduced to the Cannabis Power Score, which is being used, by the way, in Massachusetts. So this is a tool where, growers can log in power consumption, water, some of the environmental factors, and frankly help them be more efficient because they have something they can benchmark on. And then the other is, well, then how do you verify? And this kind of moves to this whole issue of the green premium, that how does a consumer, and I heard this in a call on Monday at this conference, where, how does the consumer value it? And frankly, how does it get verified? So it's one thing to say, for example, we're reducing our carbon footprint, but we're now seeing technology, which is very promising, that allows the brand to be verified, third-party verified, which is very important. And then basically using a Bitcoin technology, have it embedded in like what I would call like a little merit badge, as you might see there in the second chart, that allows the consumer to be able to scan that and immediately get verified that this is a carbon sustainable, footprint sustainable type company, or social justice company. So they're really putting some teeth behind just the words, ESG, for the consumer. And I think that's going to be very important as we move forward. And then also, I think by being more transparent, it will allow us greater opportunity to, go from seed to grave with more clarity, or rebirth, frankly. And certainly that's an area we're going to be talking about next. So any questions so far? It is silent on the chat board. We're more than willing to answer any and all questions. So some new concepts in here, and some things that hopefully are of interest. Just to show you even what we're doing at Waste Tracker, this is an example of a sustainability report. Now, as a brand or as a retailer, our feeling was that this was going to become very valuable to a business to be able to show their customers, what they were actually being able to produce. And this also report, it gets shared with the local municipality. So like the city of Oakland and others can have this dashboard where they can talk about their overall impact on the environment. Again, measurable, driven, KPIs, that whole bit. So with that, I want to talk about a little bit about, I mentioned it again at TRESS, a little bit about the investment side of the equation. And frankly, I hate to say it, money leads change. And for all those who are out looking to raise money, these are some of the factors that we're seeing. What's been amazing during this pandemic, that 150 billion was raised for the pandemic, but through emphasizing socially focused measures. So again, looking at things like the Cannabis Power Score and some other tools. That you have Neuberg Berman, 175 million fund credit facility for firms to help with this this growing emphasis. Investors are really now starting to line up their money into ESG appropriate or B certified company specific organizations. And I think that's something important for anybody on this call to understand. So like what we were talking about earlier is, but trust but verify. And so there's another example where, you can see this brand is saying it supports charity. It's locally sourced. It was a coffee bean company. They use recyclables. They're organic certified. So again, another way for them to be in front of the marketplace. And then frankly, the investors are following that now. TRESS is very much involved and has had discussions with companies around the world relative to, this phenomenon and investor interest. So we do have a comment. Colorado, thanks Mitchell. Colorado has recently changed the regulations to allow for the legal recycling of cannabis waste for the first time. Congrats. But I have not come across anyone in Colorado who can recycle vape pens. Are you aware of anyone in Colorado who can process vape waste? Armand, have you run across that in California, or how are you dealing with your vape pens?
I haven't. Vape pens are probably, it's a great question. Mitchell, is your name? Yeah, Mitchell, is a great question. So I haven't come across anybody who's recycling vape pens fully. The challenge with vape pens is that there's 3 parts of waste in one vape pen, typically, on average, depending on the pen too. You have a universal or e-waste, the battery itself, and you have if it's a full waste that needs to be disposed based off of failed testing or expired or returned or whatnot, you have the oil inside the cartridge itself and the cartridge, which could be made of plastic or glass. So you have different types of waste there that needs to be handled. And the trouble is that either the licensee needs to put in the labor and the effort to separate everything and then segment it, or the hauler does. The problem with the hauler doing it is that that could be in conflict with compliance, because now we're handling cannabis waste directly rather than hauling it away, which opens up a huge other set of problems that, from what I'm seeing, the regulators are not ready to even participate in or to even assist in trying to license or in other ways regulate. So I haven't come across anybody yet. I have heard that some people are doing some fun things with it, like making art out of it. Now, whether that's, again, compatible with the compliance is completely, a different question. But so far, no, I haven't come across anything that's a simple solution for recycling vape pens, besides the segmentation of it on the licensee's end, meaning batteries go in this waste stream, and then the actual carts go in this waste stream. And that's if they're not the disposable pens. If they're disposable pens, you cannot even separate them.
Yeah, I've had, Mitchell, several people reach out to me and they were going to try it, but it's a very manual labor process, as Armand was explaining. You also had a follow-up question, and the flip side, California does not have rules to allow for legal cannabis waste recycling. They do, because technically you can't leave the location unless it's been rendered. So at that point, it's organic. So like at Waste Tracker, we were taking it to our zero waste recycling facility that was turning it into compost. But you were saying yet operators are recycling despite the gray area. Yes, that's true. There are some that have done their best, and there are others that throw into the dumpster. Armand, what have you seen as trends in Los Angeles? I'm speaking mostly from Northern California, but what trends have you seen in regard to that?
So if it's just generally about the cannabis itself rather than the vapes, the trends vary from operator to operator, and I've heard a lot of licensees still dispose of their waste in dumpsters and they don't recycle it. And I have also seen a lot of our clients do their best to make sure that the material does get recycled. Now, is to answer the question a little more directly, as far as rules to allow for legal cannabis waste recycling, the rules in California, the regulations do allow for recycling. They're not very descriptive on how to recycle it, but they do define that the waste needs to be transported to a licensed waste facility. And generally, a licensed waste facility will have not only a landfill, but they'll also have actual recycling outputs for waste. They'll have either gas to energy or they'll have composting sections of their facility. So you're able to still take it to these facilities, us as haulers take it to these facilities and segment the waste and say, okay, this is the waste that we collect that's organic, that will go to this section. This is the waste that is non-organic, that can't be recycled, it's going to go to this section. And so far, we haven't had any issues on a compliance side in that regard. So to answer the second part of that, to what advice do you have to help operators in California in talking to the regulators to get them on the same page as those in Colorado? I would say, it's something that actually, we spoke about earlier, and something that Emily commented on in the chat here, saying that, the industry needs to present themselves in one body. I completely agree with that. I think we need to have one body that can represent these voices, can represent this information to California, to the regulators, not only just the BCC, but CalRecipha, CDFA, and Department of Health.
And don't forget, for everybody on the call, the states like California actually became very aggressive, and we met with the governor's office a year ago. They have a 75% recycling goal that mandated for starting in 2020. Now, they delayed it because of the pandemic, but 75% of all organic waste needs to be recycled. The problem is they didn't put any teeth in it. I mean, they're basically relying on the local municipalities to enforce the rules, and then they're going to do some sample testing of the transfer stations to see how the compliance is working. The other problem is they didn't really understand how much waste the cannabis industry and the hemp industry were generating. And so you got to remember, this is coming on radar for them, really without any data. And frankly, the meeting we had with them, we were in the governor's office, and they had the one person who's doing spreadsheets, trying to understand what's going on. Let me move forward a little bit with our time, because I know there were a couple more questions, and I'd like to get back to them if you don't mind. I think so. Yeah, I think the third thing that we were talking about is, we talked about, governance. We talked about how technology can play a role. I shared with you how investors are starting to look at this new green world. And I think that's a key driver. Again, money drives, hopefully, change. The next piece we want to talk about is, how do you monetize it? And frankly, that's how our journey at Waste Tracker led to meet with Dr. Trey Riddle. Trey, we had met a year ago and had been one of the early pioneers in terms of the hemp industry and frankly, turning on the material. So with that, Trey, good afternoon, and wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, great, thanks. Appreciate it, super interesting stuff. I've learned a lot myself in this panel. So yeah, I think, is there a world where not only can we recycle the waste, but can we find a new home and convert it into another valuable good that can be sold? And yeah, I think there's some opportunities there. Why don't you go ahead to the next slide there, Steve? I'll try and go kind of quick in case we have some more questions. But and that was sort of the birth of this idea of STEMCore, which was originally envisioned to be a utilizer of the waste stream from THC grows, but has evolved into time to look at CBD grows and industrial hemp grows. But the basic concept is the stalk of the cannabis plant, whether that's hemp or cannabis, is fundamentally the same. It's made up of fiber and an inner woody core, and there's a variety of applications in industry where you can use those materials to replace traditional materials. And there's quite a bit of space. I mean, we're talking about giant industries. We start talking about wood and plastics, billions of dollars. And there's a lot of momentum on the hemp side anyway, that the hemp market can achieve reasonable penetration into markets like these ones here. So there's a wide variety from animal care, pulp and paper, plastics and building materials, textiles and automobile. And the reason for that is that we're really talking about a raw material. You sort of think, I'm not necessarily saying, an operator is going to make a car part. No, they might produce the waste material that then would go to a company like StemCore that would convert it into a fiber or a particulate. And then that might go to a plastic company that converts that into a plastic pellet. And then that might go to a molder. And then that might go to an automobile company. So think about in tiering, most of them you're pretty far down on the supply chain ladder, perhaps with the exception of things like animal care, where there's some lower hanging fruit and industrial absorbents to use that stalk material, to absorb both spills, industrial spills, or even animal waste. And there's a lot of companies that are already interested in this. And I think our next slide provides a sample of some of them. These are companies with proven interest. And I think what's interesting is that, some of these, a lot of these companies you've heard of, but a lot of companies you haven't either. And that's sort of the nature of industrial manufacturing. But there's some real powerhouses behind it. I mean, right now, Patagonia has a hemp fiber line of clothing that you can buy in stores today. And that fiber all comes from China. And there's really not a resource available right now for a company like Patagonia to source domestically. Similarly, in the automotive industry, they're importing plants called flax or kanaf or jute, predominantly from India and Bangladesh. And so there's opportunities to replace imported solutions with domestic solutions as well for more rapid adoption. Let's go next slide, Steve. But there's a lot of challenges as are enumerated on here. I mean, the industry, for all intents and purposes, doesn't exist in any kind of mature way. And you're talking about whole supply chains, an entire industry that has to be built, potentially all the way down from genetics, developing the right genetics for the applications, to the agronomic practices, to the primary processing, and then on into secondary processing, and then of course adoption. And particularly if you talk about the waste from cannabis producers, the THC side of it, there again, I think, Armand touched on this earlier, but there is not only is there limitations and classifications of sort of, leaf versus stalk versus biomass, even in those categories, for a converter of those materials, the quality variations could negate them or make them more valuable in one aspect or another. So, you may have one, stalk that came from one set of genetics has a better quality fiber, or you may have, indoor grow versus an outdoor grow having a better quality, and so on and so forth. So not only are the supply chains immature in that respect, the industries don't have large scale adoptions yet. And, things even like testing, what are we even testing for as an industry? We haven't even aligned on the lexicon. What are the parameters we're going to talk about, much less defining that the waste needs to be characterized. What are the numbers we're going to use to characterize them? What are the words we're going to use to describe them? We haven't really gotten there yet either.
Yeah, and Trey, in our early days of the feasibility analysis that we did earlier this year, while the pandemic had everybody locked down, we were evaluating, what is the value of a, say, cannabis stalk versus the hemp stalk? And you referred to it, I think at the time, as a Christmas tree in terms of, and it made for a lot of knottiness, which made, when you ran it through the decortification equipment, that became a harder piece of fiber to break down.
That's right, and that comes back to the quality, idea. And it's not to say that poor quality products don't have a place. They may well. They just have to be aligned with the proper vertical, right, to get there.
Right, and then the other part of it is we were looking at, well, how do we move, say, stalks from Southern California to Kentucky for processing. And frankly, the THC concerns and haulers not wanting to be caught with, quote, drugs on board, you know, and THCs. So we consulted with a couple of other experts who said most of the time the THC levels in the stalk are going to be from handling, not so much from the plant itself, genetics. But that requires a whole nother level of testing as well, which makes those kind of logistics hard. And then frankly, what's the radius you can transport to? So one of the things that we, you know, and Trey had been through this with the previous company, is like, where's the best place to get the right material that you're going to need to be able to satisfy most of the market, right? And so Trey was looking at things doing seeds abroad. We've been looking at importing. We've been looking at the domestic market. And certainly we're seeing the onslaught of people out there trying to raise $25, $30 million to build these plants. And you're still talking at least a year out before we'll see anything out on them.
Yeah, and I think to Zach's question about what's the quickest pathway, I think I agree with somebody earlier that said, you know, everybody, all hands on deck. We need all the stakeholders to be involved. It's not like the grower can unilaterally do it. It's not like the consumer can unilaterally do it. You need all the players to be moving forward in tandem as best as possible, you know, to make a effective and sustainable change.
Right. So one of the things in tying this panel together, and this is the reason why it's great to work with these guys, and I work with them almost on at least a weekly basis, and if not more. But you know, here are some of the challenges. So one of the things that we had decided to do at STEMCore was start moving on to the premise of well, let's start producing what we can with the materials that we have. And so as part of that, Trey, why don't you go ahead and lead us on our actions to date?
Yeah, so you know, the concept began to be what is, you know, kind of what is the simplest opportunity, and you know, where the quality of the material and the availability of the material, you know, is less of an impact to commercialization. And animal bedding, small pet bedding, so that's going to be you know, gerbils and hamsters and rabbits and stuff like that. Basically, use wood chips these days, and hemp is actually a superior product in terms of the absorption of the material. That's why it's also a good industrial absorbent for things like oil spills and that stuff. But right now, I mean, pets are, you know, people aren't afraid to pay a little bit of a premium on their pet because it's their pet, it's their companion. And, you know, with the state of the supply chain, unfortunately, just means that, you know, hemp products are more expensive than the incumbent materials. But this is a good place where you have a good fit between, you know, the performance, you know, the availability and the costing for the consumer. And so this is a product that's been in development by STEMCore. You know, the name is called Good. So it's, you know, good hemp, good for all, you know, embodying the idea that we can do good for the planet, and, you know, more sustainable. And so right now we're working on, you know, the biomass sourcing. We pretty much have the packaging and branding all done. And this picture on the right side, by the way, is what a large scale manufacturing center would look like to go from, you know, cannabis or hemp stalk to the product that goes in that bag. And that's typically referred to as decortication, the separation of the outer fiber from the inner woody core. So these are big capital initiatives. I mean, these are, you know, tens, if not hundreds of thousand square foot buildings, you know, multi-million-dollar investments. It's true industrial manufacturing, you know, to really get to the scales that are necessary to be successful.
And that's just, most of it is on the decortification process. Now, one of the things that Trey is astutely demonstrated is how to even source it. And one of the things we're seeing is Europe is way ahead of the US in terms of the development of hemp and hemp-related products. And in fact, there's a company out there, Bruce Linton launched earlier this year called Collective Growth, went out and raised $150 million in March, which is amazing. And it's called the SPAC. And their whole goal is to invest in companies that already have revenues. And their bullseye has been, day one, has been frankly on the European market because they feel their technology is way more advanced than what is available here in the US.
And conversion, I think they've keyed in on, you know, how do we make something people can buy, as part of that, you know, companies with revenue as well.
Right. And so for our startup, while we're trying to put together the resources to build our own plant to protect our margin, our strategy was, let's get the biomass that we need, and frankly, let's get the shelf space we need. Let's own the customer. So while everybody else is building these big plants like Panda and Hempflax and Best Fiber and Collective Growth, let's own the customer. And so we came up with our good hemp product, or sometimes we lovingly refer to it as good shit. But you know, as a working icon, but it's so far it's showing the most promise, because at the end of the day, the retailer is just one product. And so what we're trying to do is take several steps out of it, even if we have to outsource the manufacturing at the moment.
Yeah.
With that, you know, this is what STEMCore was set up to do. You know, and basically sustainability and you know, working within our planet and our ecosystem was the heart of it. And that's, you know, so we value that, and having helping us and guiding us on that has been tremendous. So with that, let me just open it up. Questions, feel free. I think we had a couple earlier. I think we addressed all those. Anybody else have any other questions? Or
Somebody had a comment about Patagonia and not being aware that they couldn't get to their supply domestically. No, they can't. And even, you know, there again, apparel grade fiber is, you know, of a quality level that's way up here. So even, you know, even though there is a modicum of hemp, you know, supply chain, the quality is really down here. And so when you talk about that, you know, there again, aligning the right verticals with your supply chain is critical.
Trey, talking even about the genetics when you were working with Sunstrand, the genetic process you went through, even identifying the seeds and working with the Kentucky farmers to help grow this particular seed and genetic for maximum production.
Yeah, genetics is a big issue. I mean, you know, to the extent that we're talking about waste out of the THC grows or the CBD grows, I mean, there may not be a lot of variation there. We don't really know, but it's likely to be more of a growing practice that affects the quality. But when you start talking about, you know, truly growing industrial hemp, the genetics become very important, both on quality, but also on yield, because you need to have the right return at all levels of the supply chain, you know, all the way down to the farmer and all the way up to the, you know, the final converter. And, you know, to date, I mean, the U.S. doesn't really have a good genetics bank available. There's some CBD genetics and obviously THC genetics that have been developed over the years, but in terms of industrial hemp for grain and fiber, they really don't exist in the United States. So those are coming in from out of the country, be that from Canada, mostly for hemp grain and food, and then coming from Europe for the fiber varieties. But the problem is that you've got these giant, you know, costs for importing the seed or paying a premium. They're sending you a 2-year-old seed. You don't know if it's got germination, all those kinds of problems. And so there is a hole in that part of the industry. And there's nothing impeding it from a regulatory perspective from developing. I mean, so yeah, we worked on replicating our own seeds in Kentucky and abroad just to bring our cost of goods down, not even optimizing the genetics, but just so we didn't have to, you know, get a shipment from Europe that was too late or whatever, you know, that you had it available to when you needed it, you know, more just in time, much less optimized to get the best yields and the best quality, which would require either a licensure of existing varieties or, you know, your own breeding program.
And it's an important point when you think about manufacturing. If you're going to service a major retailer or somebody else, you've got to have almost a predictable biomass supply, and that's very important. And so even within Waste Tracker, we're looking at how can we use that software. So if somebody does have stocks and they want to position them to be part of this program, we can start evaluating when that's going to be available, the quantity, how often, the quality of the stocks, so that then we can plan for it. Because until then, it's still going to be a very cannabis stocks. Still, I think we estimate it can be like maybe 5% of our total biomass needs. But most of it's going to have to come from hemp production, just to be able to meet the demands, because from a quality standpoint and quantity standpoint.
And
Steve,
the transportation issue.
Answer a question here. So Emily asked a really good question that I think is something I wanted to touch on real quick, since we're tapped on time or tapping out on time. As far as wastewater diversion, there are a lot of companies that will recycle or dispose of your water waste. As for diverting it and recycling it through a more sustainable approach, I've seen companies that have created equipment or products that you can implement into your process, into your operation, that can help you reuse it internally. They'll clean the water and they'll reuse it. For the life of me, I can't remember the name right now of the equipment or the company, but I can find it and I can send it to you if you like, or we can work together to look for that. And then I wanted to also answer a question that Zach said really quickly about if the companies need to take the initiative towards implementing better waste policies. And I absolutely believe so. I think that it is up to the industry itself to engage in these conversations and make our voices heard, to be able to conversate about it and get better policies drawn up that are effective and efficient for operators. It's because, that ties into the cost of things as well. As we can have more of these conversations, we can find better costs for recycling, because, as Trey was alluding to a little earlier about how in the hemp world, where, there's a premium on hemp products, it's kind of the same thing across the board in the cannabis industry. Everything's more expensive because of whether it's because of the taxation or whether because of the supply is not there to meet the demand of these producers or these products. I don't know if I answered that, but I just want to jump in specific water-based ones.
Yeah, and Armin, I'm glad you answered that. In San Jose, we saw where the water runoff from the grows was affecting the pH level of the local water supplies. So you have cities like San Jose now monitoring the stream levels, because we saw it right in front of us, where people are just watering and rushing it down the drain, and not treating, because the pH levels are much lower after it's been flushed through a cannabis plant. So it is definitely something. And yes, we were talking with a group out of the East Bay that had a reverse osmosis vehicle, and they were frankly looking at how to set it up so they could turn that water into a fertilizer that then could be used for other products like tomatoes or some other garden products.
Even make gray water. There's some concepts being thrown out there and innovation being thrown out there, and again, tying it to cost. Taking it for treatment adds cost to these operators. So definitely, it's highly recommended to look at these innovative equipment or companies that are recycling it for reuse.
Yeah, Mila had a question, Mila Marshall. When it comes to an engagement of the waste industry, how receptive are they to adoption for emerging industry? Do you all attend waste conventions? How do you move on this in the warehouse sector? Yes, we, as best we can, we've been attending like Waste 360 and some of the other. They're certainly aware of this industry as is emerging. I think for us, our biggest and strongest advocate are organizations like the NCIA, who have lobbyists that are working. And frankly, when I spoke to them a year ago about this whole topic, they're just looking for the ammunition that they can use and walk into the regulators.
Yes.
That's why I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to start better classifying our waste and really trying to raise that awareness, because there's nothing, especially, with all the Green New Deal stuff going on in Washington, they're looking for an industry that shows it's got some maturity and is willing to make a change.
It's hard because it's not sexy. And unfortunately, there are a lot of operators that would prefer it to be ambiguous because it benefits them in the illegal market, which is what we discussed earlier in the panel. But I want to just add on top of that, I 100% agree. We need more ammunition. We need more conversations, because it's not a sexy topic, it's not talked about a lot.
Yeah, Mila also asked the follow-up, what it would be like to engage with a community like the Sierra Club or the Nature Conservancy. I think all of it helps. We were kind of disappointed. I'll be quite honest with you, when we met with Newsom's office last year, and we had the recycling groups there, and they didn't seem to be that interested in cannabis. They were just out there to protect their overall agenda and weren't interested in exploring this new industry. So therefore, we had to take it upon ourselves to say, listen, this has got to change. And in fact, even to the point where we contacted as Waste Tracker companies like BioTrack and Metric and said, you have a hole in your system that the states are going to eventually wake up and figure out that they're going to need to be able to, they're going to need us to address as a group. And that is regarding the, the misclassification of waste, right? and how do we close that loop as a group?
One thing I'll mention too is planned communities can do a lot as well. I visited the Cannabis Business Park in Desert Hot Springs, and it was completely designed around all of these issues. I mean, they have their own on-site wastewater remediation, and it's not RO, or maybe there's a last stage, but I mean, it's much more industrial wastewater treatment systems that were planned from the beginning for the entire park, as well as green matter energy conversion right on site. So, there are some, some ideal, I think, models out there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Trust Capital, we invested obviously in companies like Waste Tracker, STEMCore, and others, and we're looking for that formula. And we recently had discussions with our investors, and that's the reason why I incorporated some of the ESG governance issues, because that's really where the metal hits the road. These are the people that are saying, listen, how do we push it up a notch, and how do we make it more of a positive impact? So, Mila, I also saw you had sent a note saying we here in Illinois, we have the nutrition loss reduction plan to reduce pH and N in Illinois waterways. There is some translation that needs to happen in the conservation community, indeed. Yeah, I second that. We saw that in Maine. We've been working with a gentleman in Maine for almost a year now, and he was frankly flawed that the Maine EPA didn't want anybody to touch the waste other than taking it to the landfill. So he was greatly disappointed, and the only thing he was able to get out of it is, maybe we can set aside the stalks. And then, to his credit, this is, I think, the thing everybody has to realize. He aligned himself with a person who came up with a fire starter using hemp and sawdust. And they basically started selling fire starters to KOA campgrounds. So I love it. I mean, that's a practical example of how to convert some of the waste immediately into revenue. So I think we're out of time. I think we have a minute left. Anybody have one more questions they want to get in, or 3 minutes?
Zach had a question for you.
Well, thank you. No, I know we covered a lot, but I think I wanted to show you everybody the strand that we're taking from the waste collection standpoint to the technology, and then back into having Dr. Trey here on the panel talking about the challenges and where we see this whole market heading. And I think also coming from the cannabis industry, we sometimes forget the hemp industry is regulated. And so a lot of states don't allow you to bring the waste across state lines. So we have to talk about the cousin plants as well in this equation, and seeing how we're dealing with all this.
Yeah, I think it'll take time, but we'll get to a point where everything will get streamlined eventually. It's still new, so as more we have these conversations, the better it'll be.
Zach, I see you online.
Yeah, right on. Just wanted to start. I mean, you've wrapped it up. I wanted to thank you guys. This conversation has been super intriguing, interesting to have all these different perspectives in there. And it's such a critical part of this industry right now is the waste stream. I mean, I just remember my friends having loads of vape cartridges and plastic bags who are in the sort of sustainability world. They're like, what do we do with these? But
Yeah.
You hear about the investors and how investors can push this argument, and so much of this, it's neat that there could be a circular economy here.
I think, and Zach, you had asked the question, I just saw it now, but really the companies have to look at what their mission and vision is, right? And frankly, what are they doing with waste? I mean, we never thought I would get into the waste business, but it became more than waste. It became compliance and recycling and sustainability and all the other things. So I think there's an opportunity there. And I think the investor community is starting to show they're voting with their wallet. And I think everybody in this room would agree that will drive change. So for example, like when we've had discussions with several exchanges out there about, well, you've got this exchange to buy and sell flour and oils and everything else. What about waste?
Right.
So when the grower is done, he has so many pounds of this stuff. Where can he go with it next? And again, in the farming industry, which Trey saw firsthand, everything is monetized. There isn't anything left in the field that they know what to do. They don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, well, it's coming our way, and hopefully it just continues to speed up. We have to get moving here, and I got to close us out. So again, thank you so much to everyone in attendance. Thank you for joining.